Good night to our viewers, good night to our panelists, good night to Guyanese at home and abroad. Tonight, as we start this very important discussion, let me give credit to the Globespan team, to Devin Bissoon, who is our technical operator, to Kumar, Nohar Singh, and the entire Globespan team. I wish to extend thanks to them for all the hard work they're doing in making these free shows available. I'd like to also call upon sponsors and friends. Do please feel free. Please feel very welcome to support our shows and our discussions. Ladies and gentlemen, everyone, well, almost everyone, most of us anyway, we are all so focused on elections in Guyana. The campaign meetings, the rallies, the political speeches, all going on as the candidates work to push their party's agenda to the electorate. People are mostly on a political high during the season, and we may well continue in this vein for another month or so. But while we're enjoying the handouts and dreaming about the political promises that are being made, there are things happening across this country that escapes our attention, things that, if we were not so distracted with politics, would make us do some deep soul searching. Things that are bad, really bad for us all. You see, if we were to focus a little bit on just one area where things are really bad in the oil and gas sector, while we're busy with politics, hazardous waste is now a real threat, both present and in the future. Our marine environment is being seriously threatened. Our land is under threat. People are being abused, and people one side. You see, friends, while the politics is ongoing and we are on this political high, the oil companies are ensuring that we are not only financially affected, but environmentally threatened and weakened. Listen to this. By the end of next week, Exxon would have flared at least 3 billion cubic feet of gas. 3 billion. That is way beyond what is expected from natural operations. Forget the lost revenue for a minute. What about the impact on the environment? According to Washington Post, even Russia requires its oil drillers to make use of 95% of the gas they produce. Flaring and even venting is only allowed to reduce or remove safety concerns. But who will speak? Who can stop it? The government seems clueless. Their expert documents and studies are prepared by the same oil companies. Hypocrisy is at an all-time high because every politician cries about a green state, picks the banner up of a green state when there is nothing in their contracts to prevent or penalize the oil companies with regards to creating permanent damage to our land and waters and, of course, our atmosphere. So who can stop them? Viewers, you and I can. We the people can. If we can educate ourselves and become the agents of change, forceful change, that can force the government and force these companies to be responsible for the environment. You see, politicians don't want to hear about renegotiating the contracts. Because when people think renegotiate contracts, you're thinking only about revenues, how it will affect one party or the other. But I am calling for renegotiation with environment, with safety in mind, with people in mind, with land and water in mind, with atmosphere in mind. And there is much more that we can talk about and we will talk about tonight. But friends, you and I, the people, we need to educate ourselves. So tonight's program is one in a series that will seek to educate our populace with the truth about what is going on with the oil sector and the environment and other areas of concerns, and who better to start this educational exercise to tell us about our concerns and what we should be aware of are our guests tonight. We have Miss Annette Arjoon, who is known for her position. Annette has been on our show before, and she's known for her position with regards to the environment, her deep love for the environment and for those who can care for the environment, and her participation and leadership for initiatives in this regard. And we also have a unique personality with us, Professor Dr. Maya Trotz of the University of South Florida. Dr. Trotz is a specialist on matters of environment, and tonight we are fortunate to have these two panelists who can talk to us and help us to understand and maybe unravel some of the issues relating to oil and the environment. To our panelists, welcome to this Globespan platform tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And Annette, let's start the discussion going by looking at a simple, fairly simple, so-called simple, but serious issue. I don't know how many of our viewers, I'm certainly hoping that many would, but I don't know how many of the people of this country would be aware of the threat that is contained within things like ballast water. I mean, when you say ballast water, when I spoke to 10 persons talking about concerns with regards to ballast water, people don't have a clue what we're talking about. People are not aware that when a ship comes to collect oil, it brings polluted water that it has to discharge. But Annette, take us into this discussion. Let's start with the easiest one to explain. Unravel it for us, the concerns with regards to ballast water. As we go through 5 or 6 items tonight, talking about waste, talking about environmental impact, talking about monitoring, and later on we'll get to flaring and penalties and so forth. But let us start the program discussing a little bit of this issue with regards to the environment, ballast water, and other things that you might want to put in your introduction.
Great. So first of all, Yog, thanks again for having me on your show, and I appreciate Nohar's contribution as well. When you mentioned ballast water, I would want to say that generally what I've noticed over the past few years is that what is out of sight is out of mind. And only because when the fuel tanker came a week or so ago to uplift our first shipment of oil, there was some discussion in the public space about ballast water and the implications of us not having very stringent measures in place to monitor and manage ballast water and its use. So for the average listener out there who might not be familiar with ballast water, the tanker that is coming to collect our oil is coming empty with, well, it's coming to collect the oil, but it needs to have stabilization, and that is normally achieved by having ballast water, which basically allows it to be stable. So in this case, from what I've learned, is the tanker has 1 million barrels of ballast water that it comes with, which it has to discharge before it could have enough space to uplift our oil. Now, ballast water, wherever it's uploaded from, it's very important. So, for example, if we were to look at the most polluted marine space globally, is the water around China, for example. So if you're uploading ballast water there and you're coming to Guyana to collect your oil and you have to discharge the ballast water, if it's not treated, it could bring all of those invasive species and eggs and larvae and everything, which could have a very detrimental impact on your marine environment. Now, in this day and age, there are some very clear requirements that you should have a ballast water protocol, you should have a ballast water treatment on board, and more importantly, your ballast water discharge must be done in a very controlled manner, and your ballast water documentation must be foolproof.
Correct.
What came on my radar that got me a bit concerned was, one, when I was trying to find out where was this tanker coming to Guyana from. I am yet to establish its origin or where it uploaded its ballast water. However, what I did discover is the tanker is registered in the Marshall Islands. Now, I want to touch on that briefly, if I may, because that in itself tells me that the company that owns that tanker found it extremely convenient to register it in the Marshall Islands under what we would call flags of convenience in countries such as Marshall Islands, Panama, other countries that have extremely lax responsibilities, and their vessels are not necessarily kept in what we would call ship shape. So the mere fact that you have a vessel registered in a country which does not practice the highest standards for managing your ship, much less your ballast water, that caused me great concern.
Right. Well, and you know, one cannot understate the importance of these things. Dr. Trotz, your specialty in the environment, I know, of course, has a lot to do not just with marine concerns, but terrestrial concerns too. What's your take on some of these areas, not necessarily restricted to the ballast water, but in terms of what you would have expected in terms of guidelines and in terms of the checklist of things that needs to be done and stuff like that?
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. And thanks for inviting me on this show, Yog, and for Annette for definitely organizing or recommended my name. I really like what Annette has touched on and the way she's approached it in terms of even looking to see where a ship was registered and what kind of regulations are there. Because we're in a very highly interconnected space. And I think we're all learning from a lot of this. And in terms of the ballast stuff, I mean, this is stuff that is very current for the field I'm in, environmental engineering, the type of research projects that we look at. How do we make our ports more sustainable? I moved to Tampa 15 years ago, and at that time we had a desalination plant, which is one of the second largest on this side of the world. Trinidad and Tobago had the largest one at the time. But the issue, they had some issues with the quality of water that they were pulling in. And one of the theories was this issue of this invasive species that had come in on the ships. And it was a ship that they thought it was a species that was coming from Asia. And so there's a lot of research to be done on just how we manage, not just the ballast water, but what's also just, the bottoms of the ships and everything. How do we monitor for chemical species, for biological species, and then for microbial pollutants and so on. So active in research for those things. And the questions that Annette is raising is sort of under who's regulating where that ship is leaving from. Really important if we're thinking of our waters off of, Guyana. I do feel that, people are going to play this issue that Exxon is so safe and so much more doing less environmental harm than, let's say, our gold industry is doing with mercury in the interior regions. Or people might say, well, why are you fussing up when you put raw sewage into the Demerara River? And those are all real things. And I think what we're maybe becoming even more aware of now is a lot of these environmental challenges and what the issue of a large corporation that should be more responsible, obviously, is, or that is supposed to be so responsible, should be one that is also bringing these issues to the forefront in Guyana, right? That it's saying, well, here's what ballast water is. So why does the Guyanese population not know what ballast water is? And you have this huge industry coming. So failure on their part in terms of really educating a population on the industry that's coming there.
Correct. Well, I've noticed a couple of our viewers have rightly called, what's the EPA's status and where is the EPA, so forth. And I would remind them that, even oil now, and you look at the national newspapers, I think the executive director of EPA had said since October last year that it is impossible for this unit, that is the EPA, to be established and fully staffed by the commencement of oil production in 2020. And oil production, as we know, has come and gone. I mean, the commencement has come and gone. We are now an oil producing nation. And so we are not getting the confidence. And tonight we're going to list some more areas. Annette, you were going to make a point.
Yeah, just to add to what Maya said, and Maya, what we also have to be very aware of, for example, MARAD, or Maritime Administration, has responsibility for this space and for inspections of any ships operating in Guyana under Guyana flag or international flag. Now, the reality is MARAD has no capacity to get 190 kilometers offshore to be present, to check on the fuel tanker that's coming, its ballast water, protocols being adhered to, even for us to even take a sample of the ballast water to determine for ourselves, does it have any contaminants? And Maya, you might want to touch on, for our viewers' benefit, how, for example, lionfish decimated the Caribbean in some areas, because that was introduced as well through ballast, from what my understanding is. So when you come back to the viewers wanting to understand why are we so concerned about ballast water, well, for the simple fact that our marine fisheries is an extremely important sector. It contributes about 3.5% to our GDP last time I checked. But most importantly, especially in this time, it employs over 20,000 plus Guyanese. So if our fisheries is contaminated by any introduction of invasive species, our fishermen and our fisheries are going to suffer.
Correct.
Significantly.
Yes, go on.
So the lionfish invasion that's been happening across the Caribbean and in Florida, it is a species that came over from from Asia, and it eats everything. It's gorgeous to look at, but it eats a lot of the fish on the reef. And so what you've found happening is a lot of the reef fish are gone. With the reef fish gone, then you don't have the fish that would eat the algae, and the algae keep the reef clean. And so you start having this, domino effect of things that end up killing your reef. So now the things that people are trying to do are sort of like, well, let's eat the lionfish. If there's so many of them, it's not a species that would normally be eaten in the Caribbean, but you can find it on the restaurant, and on a menu list of restaurants in Barbados and other places, as one way that people are at least trying to kill them, or they just kill and leave in the sea, is a case of many places in Belize and so on. But hopefully, it's about, do we have that awareness of the marine environment in Guyana, though? And I do feel that with our waters being so turbid, and so people don't access or use it the same way that they do, I think, in other parts of the Caribbean region, apart from, say, the fishermen or so. And so it's, how do you now empower the fishermen to really be the first ones, the canaries in the coal mine, literally, to tell us when something is looking a little different? And what do the tools for that empowerment look like?
Correct. And to just clarify, to our viewers out there, there are many areas of the oil.
One second as we reconnect to Dr. Yog.
Okay.
If you guys would like to further any of your points in the meantime, that would be okay.
Yeah, so Maya, what I wanted also just mention, and you might want to put it in context, I'm not insinuating at all that the fuel tanker, because it's registered in the Marshall Islands, originated from the Marshall Islands. But I want to also put it out there that right now there's a huge controversy where the nuclear dump site in the Marshall Islands is being compromised, and we have some seepage of nuclear, waste. You also have the Fukushima meltdown, where a lot of hazardous and radioactive waste is being pouring into our marine space. So here again, in this day and age of contamination, even by radioactive sort of elements, you have to be so militant about where your ships are coming from, and how they're discharging either polluted or treated water in our marine space.
Correct, correct. Because I guess the other concern we have is not just the immediate impact, because Dr. Truss, both you and Annette mentioned that, look, with the fish, the contamination of the fish species, for example, it is not something that will happen overnight to our viewers and disappear, you know. It is something that is making a permanent change to the way our marine species will cohabit and will eventually evolve. So there is greater concerns, and if we can address a little bit of, you mentioned hazardous waste, if we can mention, we could discuss a little bit what concerns there are for what terrestrial concerns are there with regards to hazardous wastes.
Well, I could just start because I live right next to the landfill in Guyana. I mean, that's where my family is. I look out the room and I could see the landfill, and so before the landfill that we had in off of Princess Street, the Mandela landfill, you know, that was literally right next door to houses. And we put everything there, and it probably was not a lined landfill. When that closed, the IDB funded the Hazardous landfill, which has, you know, stipulations on what the setback should be, like where the community should start, which are much further than where they start now. And the current situation is they're putting even more housing literally much closer to the landfill. The Eccles Industrial Zone goes much closer. And this is something that students at the University of Guyana, as part of their environmental studies classes, they've done projects on this. You know, I have a Guyanese student, and their team has done this wonderful presentation looking at sort of what are the regulations and what does housing and planning look like. And you know, when I'm there, I am upset because I could smell the landfill, but for everybody living in that neighborhood, including my mom, it's sort of like they don't smell anything. So this Christmas, I put in an air sensor to at least start collecting some, you know, particulate matter. So basic air quality data, because it used to be on fire at times. But that sort of information is not the kind of thing that we see a lot in Guyana. So we have no idea what our air quality looks like, even in Georgetown, even in the congested parts. Start to look at now, I didn't know that Exxon or any of the oil companies were actually planning to put hazardous waste into that landfill. And if that is true, that's even more horrific. So it is supposed to be a lined landfill. There are supposed to be water quality reports that come out. That was part of the IDB contract. When in 2010, 11, I think, when they were still going through with it, I'd gone into the IDB in DC, asked them about that project. And they had said, you know, it's problematic because they've not been collecting the water quality or giving them the water quality reports. Now they have housing there, lots of housing. Correct. So the leachate, so when you put the waste and you cover it and so on, you know, the stuff starts to degrade. And then the leachate, all the liquid stuff that comes out, which has your heavy metals, your organics that may be harmful, that then goes into supposedly these lined ponds. And I did get a chance to go and visit. It goes into these lined trenches that then gets pumped into these settling ponds. So they're open ponds, and the sediment and so on would settle, and maybe there's some degradation of some of the organic matter, and then that likely gets emptied out into one of the trenches, which then makes its way into the Demerara River. So this is around, I forgot the name of the gas station, but it's in the Eccles area. So the thought that you would be putting something hazardous in that landfill, right? So we're not really monitoring probably the different waste that's coming in. All your household waste we have lots of hazardous stuff that we throw away. Is pretty much probably not being degraded properly in those open ponds. Mm-hmm. And therefore it's going to make its way into the trench and into the river. I think for the hazardous chemicals that might be used in the industries that are in Guyana or that are coming to Guyana, it's really upon them to sort of like, what are you putting in here and where is it going? It's also, I don't know what the contract looked like with the persons who are managing Hazardous, but I would assume they don't have enough funding to pay for all of the monitoring that's required and to pay for the types of chemicals that we might be now having to deal with because of the oil industry.
Correct. And, if I can quote you, Doctor, Dr. Trotz, to our viewers out there, she has opined as follows in a communication between Annette, myself, and her, which is a very poignant statement. To use her words, we need to look at investing in people and institutions needed to address these sustainability challenges surrounding energy production and use, especially programs like environmental engineering and sciences, which have led many of the regulations we see in place for clean air and water. In other words, Doc, you're basically pushing, and I agree with you, and I think we all do. Guyana needs to establish a strong education system, education program, curriculum that can drive the types of studies which would have people research and report on the environment. I mean, I will quote David Kahn's comment. He said, "Prevention is better than cure, and steps must be taken to prevent a catastrophe. We cannot depend on fishermen for their feedback to take action." So it speaks to your point, and this calls for education. So if you want to elaborate some more on this call for education.
Yeah, well, the types of education that, we push in environmental engineering definitely does say the fishermen, and what they say is very important. Correct. And that they are Correct. Part of it. So a big thing that we're pushing from engineering, at least from the National Science Foundation in the US right now, is this idea of convergence research, which just says, you're doing what you're doing right now, you're bringing these different disciplines together.
Because they're the front of your data collection.
They are, and we're addressing a big challenge, and we're going to start with the language needed to discuss this. We're going to start with, what does each discipline bring? But could we actually come up with something, a new approach, a new way to address and solve this big problem, which is literally probably something to do with how does Guyana, sustain or grow its economy to, sustain its people. And unfortunately or fortunately, oil is now part of that agenda.
Correct.
So you've seen a lot of emphasis on investing in skills for people to feed that industry, which is great. I know young people who are getting employed there. Folks have called on me for interest in, going after some of the environmental studies that have been put out. And I was like, not me. Let the young people get paid and do it. But I think we need some other side that says, there's another way that we need to be thinking of living, and how do we invest in building our skills for that? So yes, I might have to go and work on that oil thing for now, but I'm really supporting renewable energy, and I would like to see that into our mix. Give me the skills so that I can get into that field, because as a young person, I don't have much say in this oil deal that has been done, right? It says that we are interested in the water, Annette could speak of the environments where she's been working and all of the types of research that we need to push to really empower Guyanese to see that what you have and what you've been saying and what your mom and your auntie and everybody's been saying, those are valid areas of research to go to. Our indigenous population, there's so much interest in or investment or attention being paid now to the knowledges that they bring to the table. And how have we as Guyanese, how have we valued that, or how have we engaged that at the university or at the technical college? And I think there's some movement going on with that, but these are things that people have been calling for years. And I think a long time. And I think what's would be really good with, and back to this idea of environmental monitoring, well, you need instruments and you need people who can manage those instruments and run those instruments.
Correct.
And you need people to take samples and all those sorts of things, and we have not invested in those things. And so it would be great for the University of Guyana faculty who now have some funded equipment there to talk about what the equipment could measure, and what else they might need or who they may need to team up with to measure some of the things that could potentially come from an oil industry and get trained on it. You know, Exxon knows these things. They've come to a country where they know there's no functioning equipment to measure the dispersant that they might have to put into the sea.
Of course. So
May I?
Well, yes.
I want to touch on two things, but just to say that I agree with Maya about the importance of the fishermen. I want to say that for me personally, I have learned as much from the fishermen and the sea turtle hunters as I have from all the fancy programs I've gone at university and internationally and all of the workshops. So there's absolute value in information from the fishermen and having them in your formal network. And Maya, we refer to this as new knowledge, KNEW. They have known
because they've known
their grandfather or fisherman and great grandfather, and they could tell me a whole lot more than we could ever hope to know in our lifetime. Secondly, I want to say as well too that we have started networking with the fishermen and the fishers complexes. We're also going to be signing an MOU with some international fisheries organizations who are going to be deploying technology to assist us in what we need to also start being capable of monitoring. But I also want to say, coming back on the education and awareness, I honestly feel that in a general sense, we ought to have had kicked into high gear our general awareness and education program from the time oil was discovered in 2015. If we have an informed nation, we could have a lot of very engaging discussions and conversations and ask our public servants the right questions and be given correct answers. Right now, our entire nation is a sort of in a vacuum where they're only getting information piecemeal. And of course, this works wonderful for the people who want to conveniently categorize whatever information is out there as fake news or whatever. Look at the attack right now, for example, on my colleague Dr. Jan Mangal, on even Global Witness. These are people who have been doing a lot of work over the years. I mean, the fact that our president would have conducted his due diligence before having Dr. Mangal spend an entire year advising him. The fact that anybody, through a quick search, could establish the authenticity of Global Witness and the work they do exposing corruption in the oil and gas sector. So here again, coming back to us needing to have a general awareness program by people of high integrity too, so you don't, shape your message to whatever, agenda you have. It is really, really past overdue.
Correct. So let's take a quick commercial break, and when we get back, let's address regulations or lack thereof, and your comments and your thoughts about monitoring, whether there is adequate, whether there is any regulation in place for the monitoring of the FPSOs, and then we move on to the burning, literally, no pun intended, the burning question about burning the natural gas. Quick commercial break. Over to them.
Looking for an embroidery service or advertising services? Look no further than Inspire Incorporated. Get your very own personalized items that include rubber stamps, ID cards, mouse pads, diaries, polos, office wear, and so much more. Create your own logo or messages on any substrate. It's very quick and efficient. Call Inspire Incorporated today at 222-2042 or visit at 62 Area Q, Turkine, Guyana. Times are changing. There are more airlines operating to Guyana. Travelspan GT offices in Guyana have very low fares. Fares have never been so low from Guyana to New York. Choose from Caribbean Airlines, American Airlines, and others. Call Travelspan GT for low fares and your choice of airlines. From Guyana to New York, fares start from $278. And from Guyana to Toronto, fares start from $354. And from Guyana to Trinidad, fares start from $174. Call Travelspan GT for any destinations. In addition to low fares, Travelspan GT has cruises, hotels, and tour packages to Europe, Dubai, India, Dominican Republic, and many more. Call our Georgetown office at 227-1701 or Rose Hall at 337-4287 or New Amsterdam at 333-6230. Travelspan also has offices in New York, Trinidad, and Guyana. Again, call 227-1701. Travel plans, call TravelSpan.
Thank you. We're back. Let me endorse both of those companies who have been part of this program, both Inspire Inc. and TravelSpan. So we're back, and we want to talk a little bit about the monitoring and the regulations or lack thereof. And to our panelists, I'm not going to add anything else. Over to you both.
All right, so if I could start,
Sure.
Maya. So if you look at what Dr. Adams very honestly stated at the Guyana Manufacturing Service lunch last week, where the Environmental Protection Agency needs to be given the resources to set up the department with the requisite skill sets to monitor this new sector, and the fact that at the moment, presently, he's going to barely be able to access 1/12 of his budget in a time of forest oil. That speaks for itself. Now, if you also look back at the EPA Act that was that was passed in 1996, there is no mention of petroleum and oil in that act. And we found out, to our great dismay, last month, when Repsol's mud spill was made public, that even though Dr. Adams had clearly wanted to impose a very high fine to really make the polluter pays principle have teeth, he was constrained by the maximum fine being a paltry $7,000 US. And as he stated as well, too, and thank goodness he has come with 3 decades of experience in the Department of Energy in the United States, so he knows exactly what he's talking about and what he needs to guard against. As he said, the fact that it was reported as only 82 drums of mud that already spill into maybe or muddy Atlantic Ocean, that wasn't the fact. The fact was, if that mud had become compromised by keeping the pressure of that well to what it needed to be safe, you could have had a massive disaster, and we don't even want to contemplate the massive disaster that could have occurred. And here, Guyana would have been, awoken very harshly, that we could have had $70 million US worth of damage, and we only allowed to fine 7,000. So when you come back to a lot of things that need to be corrected really, really quickly, I wanted to touch on those 2 points, but also to say that it is unacceptable that we have had our oil spill response plan in draft for almost 2 years. And I checked before I came on this show to sort of get an idea of where we are. And I was advised that right now, because of insufficient data, this oil spill response plan needs at least 20 annexes, for example. And because of insufficient data, it cannot be completed. This is incredible. So here again, to as much as we keep hearing about best practices and oil companies following best practices, Repsol was out there with their contractor following best practices, but of course, EPA was not out there to verify they were indeed practicing best practices, and look what happened. Same thing with Exxon right now, with us not having any presence offshore. How are we verifying, for example, that all of the best practices they have on paper are actually being practiced? And here again, too, we know with the onerous inclusion of the stabilization clause in 2016, that it almost is a get out of jail card where it comes to, the environmental responsibilities being done in a timely manner.
If I may interject, if you can take a moment and explain to the viewers, explain to all of us the exclusion of that clause. When you say stabilization clause, what would it mean to the populace, to the general viewership?
Okay, so my first-hand knowledge of the stabilization clause, when I questioned it in terms of environmental protection, is that the inclusion of the stabilization clause in the revised agreement in 2016, basically, if, for example, the EPA develops new regulations for Exxon and other oil companies to have environmental safeguards in place, they can now claim this back as a cost to Guyana. So, but my larger point is, indeed, if this is not costing the company, but we ourselves have to be paying for it, why not do it since 3 years ago anyway? And this is where I said to a colleague yesterday that my experiences with Exxon over the past 3 years have shown me very clearly that their environmental program is not aligned to Guyana's at all. And in this time of when we're aspiring to be a green state and develop a green economy, we need to have what is happening offshore in what we would call our blue spaces very much aligned to what our aspirations are of becoming a green state. And it is environmentally negligent, almost criminal, the 3 years and counting, Liza 1, Liza 2, now Payara, we don't have the most basic environmental baselines of marine mammal surveys in place. And why is that important? How are we monitoring the impact of the oil operations if we don't have a baseline to monitor it against? Absolutely. How are we managing what we haven't measured? And coming back finally, Yoga, I want to touch on this a little bit later. We know that right now the statistics are showing that every year there's 100% increase in marine traffic, right? So I'm going to continue after Maya finishes, but okay. I want to really speak a little bit about why those baselines are so crucial right now.
Absolutely. Over to you, Doc.
No, I think the baseline issue is important because if in the event that something happens, you have to show the impact from before oil started, and we don't have access to that. So I think ExxonMobil has probably done some of those studies. They probably have a ton of data, and for some reason I could have sworn I heard that some of that was going to be shared on a platform that Guyanese can learn from. Rather than have to pay for those studies again, because we'll probably have to pay for them already, because it's a cost of production. And so how do you bargain, to sort of say that we need, like, this needs to be public and we need to augment it with our own monitoring, with our own, goes back to who's going to do that, which program in Guyana is equipped to do that, and who's being trained to do that. Are there Caribbean people or Guyanese people in the diaspora, wherever, who have some of those skills who could be called in to assist in building that capacity? And from what Annette is saying, that probably has not been done on any very formal scale, which is very unfortunate. Yeah.
What is worse? Before I come to you, Annette, because we want to get into this topic a little bit, but what is worse, if we must admit? I mean, look. The truth is that, yes, by all means and measures, you see the EPA trying. But guess what? We have known about oil for years. Since before the last elections, blocks were sold. We ought to have been better prepared. Now we are playing catch up, and you can never catch up because the environment is not going to wait on us. The people are not waiting on us to dump their stuff. So, to these issues, to our viewers out there, it is very important, and I want to touch on something just before I hand over back to Annette. There are two things. One is there is the EPA. They're the government and environment, the government watchdogs or the government empowered watchdog of the environment. But there's also the people empowered groups, which is even more important because it's the people connection that will speak to the fishermen and speak to the people who will see changes in the environment that will bring the reports in. Over to you, Annette.
All right, so let me be pellucid and pellucidly clear that my engagement with Exxon so far has made it very clear that they are non-governmental because of our 30 years of on-the-ground presence and institutional knowledge. We could question a lot of the data that their consultants are putting out there. I have discovered this in spades. I had a real problem where even when we were trying to get our University of Guyana students to go out on some of those assessments, when I asked that they at least take 2 of the Guyana Marine Conservation Society members on their field trips, I was told very clearly that unless it was specified by the Environmental Protection Agency, they could not do it. Now you tell me which company in Guyana that comes and finds a NGO with 30 years of on-the-ground experience, knowledge, and capacity linkages with our communities out there. Why would you not want to work with them?
All right.
Thank God Dr. Adams facilitated our board, and we draw this to his attention, and now steps are being taken to ensure any work in the Shell Beach area in Region 1, the Guyana Marine Conservation Society needs to be on board. Again, I've seen that, for example, when there is the assessments being done, the foreign specialists come in, they go out to the area, and they have no local capacity with the local indigenous communities on the ground. Now, in this day and age where everybody's fighting up about local content with the financial contracts, we need to have local content where building local capacity on the ground is concerned. So this is a huge deficit that has to be addressed. But Yog, I want to say to you that while we're looking at the EPA trying to build capacity, I want to share that we also need to be aware that the Environmental Assessment Board, which is mandated on the EPA Act to review environmental impact assessment, is a big part of this whole deficit. So, for example, when I spent a whole year during LISA 1 consultations, reviewing and attending meetings and giving feedback, nothing was taken on board. A second year with LISA 2, nothing was taken on board. Right now with Payara being reviewed, I reviewed the EIA with 2 other international NGOs, and we submitted our feedback. I am begging our president, whoever has the authority, to hold the environmental permit of Payara until these baselines are done, until we have a coastline sensitivity map that is ground-truthed and verified by the community on the ground, as well as the other specialists, whoever they may be. And if you want to touch on the capacity of our Environmental Assessment Board, that is tasked with the responsibility, the monumental responsibility of reviewing the EIA and saying to EPA, okay, go ahead or stop and get these other additional stuff done. There's no terms of reference for the members of that board. So in a time when we ought to have had the people on the Environmental Assessment Board with the requisite petroleum knowledge, expertise, whatever other complementary skill sets, from checking this week, I understand that that is not the case. So what has happened? We've had to end up giving out the reviews to international consultants, who of course will not have Guyana's interest at heart. This is part of the challenge as well too, that I'd like to touch on, preferably with somebody from that whole board in the next environmental conversation, because it has a lot of implications of how we move forward.
Absolutely, and you know what we should do is sooner rather than later, we should have a similar panel discussion, as you're rightly suggesting, that includes not just a member of that board, but also maybe we bring somebody from the field and say, hey, what's your experiences? How are things looking out there? You know, I want to, if we can take a quick commercial break. Time is really flying by tonight. When you have something interesting to discuss, time goes by so quickly. We need to talk a little bit about the flaring, the issues concerning flaring, and the penalties that you mentioned earlier, Annette. So let's take a quick commercial break and be back in a couple seconds.
After one time is another time. Now Guyana has choices. Choose between American Airlines, Caribbean Airlines, or JetBlue with non-stop and direct flights to Guyana. Check out these low fares. From New York to Guyana, fares start from $209 one-way, $462 round-trip. From Miami to Guyana, from $205 one-way, $448 round-trip. From Orlando to Guyana, from $271 one-way, $591 round-trip. From Atlanta to Guyana, from $271 one-way, $591 round-trip. From Houston to Guyana, from $372 one-way and $751 round-trip. From Toronto to Guyana, $272 one-way and $486 round-trip. These are non-stop and direct flights with all taxes included. Call Travelspan and choose your airline with low fares. Call Travelspan now. In USA, call 718-845-0437. In Canada, call 647-557-6200. That's USA, call 718-845-0437. And in Canada, call 647-557-6200. Or book online at travelspan.com. Travelspan, serving the community for over 26 years.
Thank you. And we're back, and I must remind viewers out there, I think Norman Aslam has said it well. Exxon knows all about the potential dangers of the oil and gas business and the rules and regulations governing same. They know they're dealing with a country that lacked the experience and expertise to deal with these issues. And this is why we must have more discussions like this. Because look, I have listened to a lot of the political speeches going on. I have not heard one politician on the campaign trail talk about the environment. I've said it over and over. I may consider giving my vote to that party that will embrace environmental concerns. Let's talk a little bit about this whole flaring issue. And I know it's either flaring or venting, but some countries have proved it doesn't have to be if you plan yourself well. Viewers might not be aware what we are talking about when we say flaring and venting. So I'm going to leave it to our two experts to educate us and take us through some of the issues therein.
Well, I'm certainly no expert in flaring, so I'll ask Maya to give it a shot, and then I'll add in about the little I do know.
I'm no expert either, but I understand. So when they're drilling for oil, the methane is going to be coming up also, and so to manage that, you just burn it off, and so that's flaring. Whereas
Correct.
I imagine venting would just be not burning, but you still have to get rid of it.
Correct.
And now we don't have a process to capture and clean it and use it.
Correct. The issues are twofold. One is that I think, correct me if I'm wrong, the first one is venting, because it's a natural process in the oil drilling industry that the natural gas is there. And if you don't tap that natural gas, there can be serious harm to the rig, to the people, and everything else. So they normally, if you vent, it means you're releasing methane to the environment, to the ozone layer, and it's much worse than the carbon dioxide which you would release by burning it. So of the two evils, flaring is the lesser evil. However, I think the point that we're making here too is that there are countries and contracts that have been designed because Exxon has done this in other places. Rather than flare the gas, they tap the gas, they tap these resources, and they make use and make money for the country with it too. Sorry to cut you, Dr. Truss. I feel very passionate about it.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, you're talking about, so the methane, it's the comparison it's used is something called a global warming potential, or a GWP. And so methane, the value on that is exactly that. It's much higher than that of CO2. I think that would have been something that whoever made the agreement that we were getting into,
exactly.
would have had to take that into consideration. Sort of, is there another way to use that natural gas that would have been beneficial?
Correct.
Either to supply, So.
Correct. Well, to educate some of our viewers out there, it goes back to the root of the matter being. I think I'm lost here, but it goes back to the root of the matter being.
We lost Yog?
I think so. I think he's probably wanted to say something like going back to the matter with us being aware of these things.
Mm-hmm. So it goes back to, I don't know if my connection is getting it.
I just wanted.
Yes, go on, Anna.
Sorry, we lost you there for a bit, but I just wanted to say that whilst I'm very, very unaware of much about the flaring and all of the consequences, I do know it's obviously bad for the environment and it has to be managed. But I do know that the World Bank, for example, has an initiative where they are looking at having zero flaring by 2029. So clearly, for the World Bank to have such an initiative and set such a target, it speaks to the detrimental effects of flaring on our environment. But these are some of the things that I think the specialists who know about flaring and how much flaring Exxon should be allowed right now, and how do we as Guyana manage anyway and verify what they're actually doing. That is for the more technically sort of qualified.
But Annette, if you don't mind repeating a little bit of the penalty area, because whether it's flaring, whether it's other hazardous waste, the greater overarching concern is the penalties. There's some very, very small, pitiable penalties that are in place that the defaulting parties just laugh at. But what are your concerns, and how do we go from here?
So basically, if you come back to what I said, when the EPA Act was developed in 1996, there was no mention of petroleum, much less pollution from petroleum. So when Dr. Adams tried to, make Repsol pay for the negligence, he of course was constrained by the regulations only allowing him to fine as much as $7,000 US, which is a drop in the bucket, so to speak. So all of the years I've been going to, let's say, oil spill response workshops and training. You always hear about the polluter pays principle, and it gave me a very false sense of security that, okay, if there's a pollution that needs to be penalized, the polluter will indeed pay. But it's really a joke when you actually look at how constrained our EPA is as to the limits of fines they could charge. I'm happy to hear Dr. Adams announce that has been reviewed by his legal department as we speak. And I know that he, with his 30 years of experience, would have a very good idea and will ensure that those regulations have appropriate penalties to really make the polluter pay. So I'm looking forward to that. As a matter of fact, if we had adequate penalties, it could offset a lot of the experts we need to have in his oil and gas department, because to find qualified people, you need to, of course, pay them well too.
That's right.
I think I think it would be good, Annette, and for a group of other folks in Guyana to ask for a tour of the EPA and to see the types of instruments that they have for monitoring anything, so that Guyanese could really get a grip on where we stand with lack of investment in these areas and demand it.
That's right.
I think that would be good to do, Annette.
Indeed. And I must thank you both for keeping the drumbeat going on, because we cannot be overly active. There's nowhere that we can be overactive on this issue of the environment and stuff like that. It's been a wonderful chat to you both, ladies, to you both professionals in your field. We are out of program time, I'm sorry, and we will certainly do this again. And next time we're going to hope to get the people from the EPA and the board and other people involved in the panel discussion, so that we can also have them speak to what's happening there. We have not at this stage considered having them, because we're all in a political spin, and if somebody says something, then it's going to be taken in one way or the other. So, Dr. Truss, thank you so much for joining this program tonight. It's been a pleasure to have you on board, and we look forward to having you again.
Thank you so much for having me.
Annette, as always, it is good to have you. I know you will keep reminding us that we have to play our part in ensuring that the environment and environmental issues are addressed. Thank you for being here too once again, Annette.
Thank you very much for having me, Yog.
And to our viewers out there, let's keep it ongoing. At the end of the day, it is not the EPA or the government or anybody that will be affected more than you and I, the people of this country. And so let us keep our interest high, keep our education high, and be proactive to ensure that this country can be protected. Forget what's happening in the past. It's already something to cry about. But here on, we can certainly make a change. Thanks to Globespan, thanks to Devin Bissoon, Nohar Singh, and all who have made this show possible. And a special thanks to our two guests tonight, Annette Arjoon and Dr. Maya Trotz. Thank you both. Have a wonderful evening, viewers. Be safe. And remember, it's election season. Vote, but don't hate. Good night, one and all.